Hi guys, and welcome to Panther Garage. Today we're going to have a look at a model that is currently under construction, the Panther F. This is actually an old kit from the mid-90s, a Dragon kit number 9008. We'll have a look at a quick glance at the instructions and the tick. But basically I picked this model up in around 2004 when I was deployed with the Americans in Iraq. The American public used to send models over for their guys to build, and one of them passed this on to me. So I ended up bringing it back to Australia. It sat on the shelf for a while in a bag, and then decided to get it out and build it. But as we'll see, it's actually not too bad considering it's a mid-90s model. In fact, the instructions, as you can see, are quite similar to the Dragon instructions today, and I actually had no problems at all following these at all. In fact, they're arguably better than some of the latest Dragon ones in terms of confusion. The only thing is though that the back of the instructions said have painted it and articulated the decals as if it had fought in Berlin in 1945. However, the Panther F never saw action at all. I've taken the liberty of sort of meeting them halfway here and saying that it did fight. It was a hasty last minute construction and then sent out in the field to battle, so it'll have no decals on it. Pretty much in a similar vein to the Russians with their T-34s when they were producing them, not painting them, and then sending them off on the line. I've sort of taken a bit of liberty there, but as I'll run through that with you shortly. Just a little bit on the Panther Mark F. This basically was meant to be the ultimate evolution of the Panther vehicle, because the Panther Mark II was cancelled. I won't go into the details of the Panther II today, but it was cancelled, and the Panther F was essentially upgraded to the final specification. That's what it was meant to be. But essentially, it's the hull of the Ausf G with a new turret. So there's the hull of the Ausf G with a new turret that was going to be placed on top. Notice that the difference in the turret from the previous models is it has a shortum, a round version of the turret, of the gun's casement, sorry, that's more efficient than the G version, which was a long, flat, curved armoured plate that ran across the front here of the actual turret. So the Germans realised they needed to upgrade the Panther as far back as early 1943 basically. It had quite thin side armour on the Panzer IV and on the Panther as well. And they realised that with a lot of anti-tank rounds that the Russians were using out of the anti-tank rifles, they were penetrating the sides of their tanks. So you'll see a lot of tanks, especially on the Eastern Front campaign, having shortened the side armour. Most people seem to think that that's to stop heat rounds, but it was actually there to protect the sides against anti-tank rifles, which were the Russians issued a great deal of these in order to try and combat these tanks. So they'd fire them in, injure the crew, disable the equipment, ruin the communications equipment, and of course potentially kill the crew. So some previous types of turrets were developed by Rheinmetall, but they weren't really successful, and the turret development was then moved to Daimler-Benz in February 1944, where the name Schmaltum was invented and subsequent development of the turret occurred. So they basically designed this new turret and then stuck it on a Panther G hull, and therefore redesignated it the Ausf F. So that's the gun was subsequently developed by Skoda, a new version of the KWK-42, designated the KWK-44-1, which was a 75mm L70 gun. Had a shorter recoil mechanism for this specific tank, allowing the Schmaltum to have a better depression and elevation, and the muzzle brake was removed. So you'll see on this vehicle here that there's no actual muzzle brake. So at the moment, this model is under production. I'm taking you through where I'm at the moment and how I got there. So essentially it came in its normal grey styrene plastic. As you can see in here, that's unpainted. We built it up and then we left it for a while, and then I decided to come back to it and pull some of it apart again and try and up specify it a little bit. So I got some photo etch parts and replaced a fair degree of the top with photo etch parts, and I left the plastic there if it was useful, or if the photo etch parts were just too complicated to make. Some of these photo etch parts were soldered using a soldering iron as well, which if you're doing photo etch parts, if you're joining metal to metal, you're best off trying to use a soldering iron if you can, rather than super glue, because the super glue just doesn't hold over time, particularly if you're trying to handle them and then attach it to the model. So I built it in a couple of main parts. The chassis first here. This currently is not completed, but I'll take you through where it's at. So I undercoated it first in a rust colour or primer colour of sort of a rusty iron, so it was a mix of pigments, and I'll take you through that in a minute. And then I overcoated it with the yellow basically, and I'll tell you how I got these little etched parts here using Humbrol's Mascol. So that's still got some more development to do, and same with this. Same sort of deal, photo etch parts all along the side here. That was pretty much standard. All photo etched grills attached here. Some of the housing components are photo etched parts, but a lot of it is actually original as well, which has stood pretty much the test of time. If we turn it around here, again more photo etch parts in here, photo etch parts on the piece of wood here, which I used a knife to scrape off the old parts and then attach the photo etch parts, and photo etch parts here. And again, likewise with the chassis, this was undercoated in a iron oxide colour and then sprayed with dark yellow, Model Master dark yellow over the top. So what to do here, there's a little bit more work to do in the next stage of each of these components here, rust components or open flaked paint exposures. Some of those I'll make rust by applying more white spirit or thinner and then allowing it to run, and you'll see that what I've done on the turret. So there we are at the moment with the hull, and then of course all of the finer parts will be detailed and painted their appropriate colours, the machine gun, the wood, and different parts sort of throughout. So this is only the rough sort of first component of that job at the moment. With the turret, I removed the old gun and put in a turned aluminium gun, which gives it a bit of weight, which is quite good. But what I did here is I decided to change colours. So I've left this the standard Ausf G base colour of dark yellow, and then in very late 1944, at the end of 1944, early 1945, the Germans actually changed their base colour to green, and the camouflage was made up of the red brown and the dark yellow, but the base coat was, instead of being the yellow, was the green. So here we have again a finished upper turret minus any markings of undercoated of the rust iron oxide undercoat colour, and again the gun as if it's just come straight out of manufacture, and it's metal coated in Humbrol metal coat polished steel, and again, it's been made to look as if it was never painted, it was just placed on. So the idea with the turret here is that it was bare metal, it was never undercoated, and they did a very quick green spray job, not very good, and then they essentially whacked it on the hull, and it was, as soon as it was able to fight, they sent it out to fight, in much the same manner as what the Soviets did with the T-34. So you'll see here a lot of rust come through because of bare metal exposure, basically, to the weather elements. Now, as I said at the start, this tank actually never fought in the war, but I've done it in terms of, it was a very hasty last minute completion of the Ausf F, and it's gone out to do its final moments for Berlin, which of course is fictional in this case. So here I'll take you through what I did to make the underneath colours at the moment. So you see all the orange components here, they're all painted on first, overneath a black colour. The whole model was painted in black, and then I've painted on the rust, the whole model in rust or orange colour, and then I've then applied the green, and then I've then applied the metal coat, and as you'll see there, you'll see some, again, the rust starting and the wear starting to show on the actual gun casement itself. So how did I do that? Well, I used Humbrol. So after the base coat, I mixed up some Humbrol matte coat with some thinner in a little vial, and then I've dipped my brush into the mixture of thinner and matte coat, and then I've dipped them into various coloured pigments and then applied it straight to the metal, and then I've gone back to the matte coat and then done the pigment again. So what pigments did I use? Well, the first one, to give it the very orangey colour, in some places but not too many places, I used Humbrol's weathering powder iron oxide. That's fantastic powder. I love the Humbrol weathering powders, they're quite good. They mix well. They mix well with the actual matte coat thinner mix, and then I've applied that in places there. The other colour, and the predominant colour that I used, was a brown iron oxide pigment, and again applying the same thing, but that is probably the one that I used the most throughout, because that again is very close to the colour of the original undercoat, so that I can match up the two colours between the hull and the turret, even though the turret is meant to just be rust. So the turret's got a little bit more orange on it. And of course dark red ochre, I've used that colour there as well. So they're the three main weathering powders. So I've applied those to the hull and to the turret. I've allowed them to dry, and again you'll see when you do this that you'll have a series of slightly different shades throughout, because you've mixed the colours through and together, but just in different areas they're different colours. So at the end of that, once they've dried, I've gone back, and instead of using the hairspray technique, I've used Humbrol Maskell, and I used a green scouring pad, the ones that come on sponges. I just tore a piece of the green scouring pad off, a little corner of it off, and then I've used that to then dip into the Maskell, and then I've dabbed it onto the model in different areas. Now what I've tried to do is dab it in areas that I think are where I want to show either rust or just paint exposure to the undercoat, particularly on the hull. And then I've used it that way, and then I've let it dry. I also did it onto the wheels. As well. I'll come back to the wheels in a minute. Once the Maskell had dried, I painted the hull the dark red, the gun metal coat polished steel, and the top Humbrol dark green. Then I've allowed it to dry. Then once it's dried, you'll see the lumps and bumps underneath the paint of where the Maskell was. Then I took white tack or blue tack, whatever you call it in your countries. In our country we call it blue tack, and then I've rubbed it over where the metal coat is, and I've also used my fingernail to scrape it off and then rub it in. I didn't apply a very thick coat of the green. It was a very thin spray coat. You should only apply the paint in a spray over the mascal. If you use the brush will drag the mascal off. So it's best off to use a spray gun. And you'll find when you rub it with the blue tack or white tack, it'll take off a little bit of that, in this case the green paint as well, and it'll blend it in quite nicely. Now this has still got to have the pin washes and the dark wash and that still put on it. So it is a little bit orange, but it'll come up nice with selected washes and filters maybe that's put on that. So I use that same format for all of these, and then after I've used the tack, in this one you can see it on here, I haven't done it on the hull yet, is I've used a brush dipped in thinner, and then I've reactivated the pigments again and let it run down, and you'll see the thinners has got in there and it's made it sort of flake off and come down as well. So it's added to the texture and it's added to the colour run of this top. Now remembering that this is meant to be rust on the turret because it was never undercoated and it was a very hasty green paint in the story that I'm running with this actual tank. The hull's a little different. The hull was, as I said at the start, is a Ausf G version, so it would have been undercoated. So a lot of these marks are going to end up just being paint chips through extreme wear and tear, and then I'll take some of those and I'll make them rust, and I'll do the same thing, and I'll show you those when I've completed it. So I've done the wheels. I haven't applied extra thinner onto to reactivate it on the yellow wheels yet, or on the brown ones, but I have on the green ones. So the green ones are effectively completed, and as you can see, compared to the yellow wheels, it's all run in and it looks quite worn and rusted. This is essentially a tank in its final fight in the survival for its country. So that's what I've effectively done with that. So the next stages of this is to complete the hull, put it together, and then do the markings, and then we'll complete. I'm using full model tracks on this when I eventually put those together as well. It's all been filtered and panel lined. A little bit of mud added as well to the tracks. I used through model tracks on there. You can see the mascol paint chipping effect that I used has come up quite well. And I think the paint on the turret, being the Ausf F turret sitting on a Panther G chassis, the turrets come up quite well. Okay, and that's not meant to be rust. It'll be a bit of surface rust because it was in the story that I'm running with on this vehicle, it was a very quick paint job over basically a freshly made turret. So they've painted it green, very quickly. That hasn't taken so well, and of course being outside the surface, steel has rusted. To a degree so has the gun a little bit, but the gun's held up quite well. That's pretty much steel. It's come straight from the manufacturer and been placed on. We have the rear of the vehicle here, and you can see there a bit of carbon effects up around the exhaust pipes, and just behind them the chipping and a little bit of dirt, mud, dry dirt. Berlin at this stage in 1945 would have been quite wet and muddy, so the vehicles would have been a little bit dirty. And they're through model tracks on the sides of the vehicles as well. Been painted a mixture of gunmetal in normal paint and gunmetal in metal coat. Just a slight amount of the metal coat. And then painted on, dried, then a dirty wash, and then a bit of thinners with a stiff brush just to bring up the buff on the sides, hence the bare metal. Okay, another angle of the front of the vehicle, other side. The variety of tools on there, the wood, different coloured road wheels, all with different effects. Front mudguard. Notice there that the toe lug is attached and not on the side of the vehicle. Ready to go. So overall quite happy with the Panther. I'll probably end up using this in some kind of diorama of Berlin. Again, as I sort of said at the start, the F model was never actually produced in the end. There was some casts of turrets and that found, but there was no vehicle that actually served. So this is a mock-up of the what could have been the F, with the F turret mounted onto a rather tired looking Panther G chassis. Hope you've enjoyed this review. It just shows you can turn an old model, a very old model, tired model, into a pretty good effect in the end, with a couple of modifications and extra parts. Okay, make sure you check out my other videos. Thanks.